In the early hours of the morning of the 23rd of March 1857, a young man named Émile Langelier staggered along the street in Glasgow's Franklin Place in great distress. He arrived at his lodgings at number 11 and was admitted by his landlady, Mrs. Jenkins. He was violently ill, and Mrs. Jenkins was anxious to call a doctor, because this was not the first time that Émile had left the house in good health, only to return some hours later with an alarming stomach malady. A Dr. Stevens arrived at 7 a.m., and Émile was treated with morphia and, concerned at the condition of his patient, he called again at 11 a.m. The landlady tentatively suggested that it was a shame to disturb Émile because he had only just gone quiet. Nevertheless, Stevens insisted on seeing his patient and entered the bedroom. He turned to Mrs. Jenkins and told her to draw the curtains, because Émile Langelier was dead. Given the circumstances of the death, its suddenness in character, and the fact that he was told by Mrs. Jenkins that 2 similar episodes of severe sickness had occurred in recent weeks, the doctor felt it necessary to consult with the doctor who had originally treated Émile on the previous occasions. He therefore met with a Dr. Thompson at noon, and the two examined Langelier and considered that they were unable to arrive at a conclusion as to the cause of death. A post-mortem therefore was conducted, and the cause of death was ascertained to be arsenic poisoning. Dr. Stevens summoned associates of the dead man to the house, and his employer, a Mr. Stevenson, was given charge of Langelier's possessions. It seems that the young man had been away at Bridge of Allen, but had returned unexpectedly the previous day. He had been in good spirits. Mrs. Jenkins said he had told her that a letter had been the reason for his return. This letter was found in his waistcoat pocket. It read, "Why, my beloved, did you not come to me? Oh, beloved, are you well? Come to me, sweet one. I waited and waited for you, but you came not. I shall wait again tomorrow night, same hour and same arrangement." Here then was the reason for his return and his good spirits. This also appeared to provide an explanation as to where he had spent those few hours between leaving the house and his unfortunate return at 2:30 a.m. In recognition of the importance of the letter and of others found in the apartment, the authorities were informed. Langelier's death created an immediate stir in Glasgow. The young man had many friends and was well liked by his colleagues in the warehouse where he was employed as a clerk. That a man of approximately 30 years of age, who seemed to have no enemies, should die of arsenic poisoning was a remarkable occurrence, and its significance was at once appreciated by a number of people. This was because the only circumstance known to be of consequence in the victim's otherwise unremarkable life was the fact of his clandestine and illicit relationship with a young woman whose name was Madeleine Smith. Madeleine was a bright girl of 21. She was willful, devious, and with a passionate, unrestrained nature. She belonged to a wealthy Glaswegian family of architects, highly regarded in Scotland, well connected, and who guarded their social status jealously. Of their 5 children, Madeleine was the eldest. She had been educated at an English boarding school, and her family's ambitions for her were to see her married advantageously. Soon after her return to Scotland, it seems Langelier had seen her in Glasgow's Sochi Hall Street, and had been so struck by her, he had determined to make her acquaintance. It took him some weeks to accomplish this, but at last he secured an introduction to Madeleine by means of a mutual friend, and the two commenced a romantic relationship. Madeleine's parents learned of this association, and as Langelier was a mere clerk from a different social class without any expectations or prospects, they ended it. Madeleine was forbidden to have any further contact with Langelier. But Langelier was not deterred. He secured the services of a middle-aged spinster friend called Miss Perry, who presumably enjoyed the vicarious excitement of the affair, and she acted as a go-between, and by her assistance they were able to exchange letters. Pierre-Émile Langelier had been born in the Channel Islands of French parents. He was handsome and possessed a romantic disposition which appealed to Madeleine. Their relationship is largely understood by the 198 letters that were recovered from Langelier's apartment after his death. Only one of his letters to Madeleine survived, the rest having presumably been destroyed shortly before his death. It is clear from the narrative told by these letters that the relationship had become much more intimate than was usual or proper for a Victorian girl of good family. Apart from Miss Perry, other willing accomplices in the facilitation of the affair were a servant, Christine Haggart, and Madeleine's younger sister, Bessie. On Langelier's side, he appears to have been a great deal more open amongst his acquaintances in detailing his relationship with Madeleine, and a number of them knew of its nature, extent, and the difficulties which had attended it in the months prior to his death. As he lay dying on that fateful morning, Langelier had sent for Miss Perry, but unfortunately she arrived too late. But she was deeply distressed and wept when she saw him. The kindly and obliging Miss Perry then took the extraordinary step of visiting Madeleine's house at No. 7 Blythswood Square. She informed Mrs. Smith in Madeleine's presence that Émile Langelier was dead. It is not known how Madeleine or her mother reacted to the news, or to any of the family's interactions which followed the death of Langelier, because such questions were never asked. It is presumed that this was the first intimation Madeleine had received of Émile's death. Whatever the effect the news and gossip surrounding Langelier's death had on the Smiths, they continued about their business and social affairs, outwardly at least, without any sign that anything was amiss. Meanwhile, tests on Langelier's body and organs showed the extent of massive arsenic poisoning. Inquiries determined that Émile had been in the habit of visiting Madeleine after the Smith household had gone to bed, that the relationship had become sexual, that in recent months her ardour for Émile had cooled, and that she had attempted to break off the relationship. On the 2nd of February, Madeleine had seized her chance to be rid of Langelier when he complained of her coldness, and she wrote, "When you are not pleased with the letters I send you, then our correspondence shall be at an end. We had better for the future consider ourselves strangers. I trust to your honour as a gentleman that you will not reveal anything that may have passed between us." She requested the return of her letters, and she said she would return his in exchange. There was a postscript. "You may be astonished at this sudden change, but for some time back you must have noticed a coolness in my notes. My love for you has ceased, and that is why I was cool. My conduct you will condemn, but I did at one time love you with my heart and soul. If you remain in Glasgow or go away, I hope you may succeed in all your endeavours." We know that Langelier was heartbroken at receiving this letter, and in tears, because Miss Perry and a work colleague have attested to the fact. Madeleine wrote again on the 9th of February as she had not heard from Langelier, again requesting in the same cold terms the return of her letters. Émile must have replied, because on the 10th of February she wrote again, with great urgency. It was clear that he would not allow her to break off the relationship. Indeed, he had threatened her with exposure to her father. She had implored him not to expose her. It would cause her ruin, she said, and thereafter, curiously, she had renewed her affectionate letters and her meetings with him. It was also ascertained that Madeleine had attempted immediately after this threat, on the 10th of February, to buy prussic acid from the chemist. It had been refused, and when the servant reported the pharmacist's refusal to her, she had simply said, "Never mind," and dropped the matter. Thereafter, on 3 occasions, she had purchased arsenic from 2 different chemists, and had given her reason for doing so as being to poison rats. The pharmacist had suggested that phosphorus would be better, but she had insisted on arsenic. This coincided with the commencement of Émile's violent illnesses. On the 25th of March, 2 days after Langelier's death, Monsieur de Miens, Chancellor of the French Consulate in Glasgow, paid a visit to the Smith house in Blythewood Square. He had known Langelier and known of his relationship with Madeleine Smith. He also seems to have been fully apprised of its nature in several important respects. He knew of its clandestine character, and he knew that it was intimate. He was also aware that there were letters which would soon come to light, and he may have received a prompt in this from someone. He pressed upon Madeleine the importance of giving a candid account of her recent meetings with Langelier, and suggested that she must have met him on the evening immediately prior to his death. She denied this and insisted that she had not seen him for at least 3 weeks. The Chancellor was an astute man, and it may even be that certain authorities had briefed him to prepare the Smiths for the events that were to follow, because he was quite insistent in this matter. He repeatedly pointed out to Madeleine how dangerous it would be to her if she denied meeting Langelier, and anyone subsequently emerged who had seen Langelier with her or in the vicinity of her house. Nevertheless, Madeleine would not move from this position. Monsieur de Miens also saw Mr. Smith, and advised him of the letters in Langelier's possession, and it was clear that his intention was to ensure that the letters were retrieved before they and their contents became known. He was too late. An attempt to retrieve the letters was made, but they were now in the possession of the Procurator Fiscal and under examination. Although Langelier regarded Madeleine as his common-law wife, and addressed her as such, unknown to him, Madeleine had become engaged to another man, William Minnock, 2 months prior to Langelier's death, and during this period, following her initial attempts to end the relationship, she had been meeting with Langelier and sending him passionate letters filled with protestations of love. In response to Langelier's hearing of rumours of Smith with Minnock, she wrote, "It was Mr. Minnock I was with at the concert. You see I would not hide it from you. Emile, he is Papa's friend, and I know he will have him in the house. But need you mind that, when I have told you I have no regard for him?" On another occasion she writes, "I would to God we were not to be so near to Mr. Minnock. You shall hear all stories and believe them." Langelier's suspicions concerning Minnock's attentions towards Madeleine had been denied for many months, but they were justified because only 2 weeks prior to Langelier's death, the date for the wedding had been finalized. The matter of the persistent and threatening Langelier was becoming a matter of supreme urgency for Madeleine Smith. In spite of the seriousness of the investigation and the position she was in, Madeleine went with Mr. Minnock to a dinner party that evening, on the 25th of March. Perhaps she heard something at the party, because on the morning of the 26th of March, the Smith household arose to find Madeleine had vanished. Mr. Minnock arrived and suggested that she had gone to the family's country home, Rowallen, near Ellenborough, and he undertook to travel there in company with her brother Jack. They caught up with her on a steamship on the Clyde and travelled on to Rouen. There Minnock asked her why she had taken off, causing her family and friends such distress. She said simply that she had done something which had upset her parents. Minnock and Jack thereafter escorted her back to Glasgow, to Blythewood Square. On the 29th of March, Madeleine told William Minnock she had written a letter to someone to retrieve some previous letters. On the following day she told him something of Langelier, and that he had been poisoned with arsenic. She also said that she occasionally bought arsenic herself. She said she would tell him all on a subsequent occasion. She never had the chance, because on Tuesday afternoon, the 31st of March 1857, Madeleine Smith was arrested by the Procurator Fiscal's office of Glasgow and charged with the murder of Pierre-Emile Langelier. The trial of Madeleine Smith took place in Edinburgh on the 30th of June 1857. She was accused of having administered arsenic to Langelier on 3 occasions in February and March. Also that she had purchased arsenic on the 21st of February, the 6th of March and the 18th of March, and that following each of these occasions he had become violently ill, and that on the final occasion this had proved fatal. For her part, Madeleine Smith made a statement denying that she had met with Langelier on any of these occasions. She said that she had never administered arsenic to him, and that the arsenic she had purchased had been for cosmetic purposes. She could not be cross-examined in court or be placed in the dock to answer questions under the law at this time, so this statement was her only answer to the charges. The wealth of circumstantial evidence, including 198 letters from Madeleine and many others written to other parties, was damning. Madeleine had been in a relationship with Langelier since 1855. She had become sexually intimate with him in the summer of 1856, and her ardour had cooled in December of that year as she was receiving the attentions of William Minnick, a wealthy bachelor who lived in the same exclusive block as the Smiths. It was further apparent that her attempts to shake off Langelier, following her engagement to William Minnick, had been rebuffed, and he had twice refused to return her letters, threatening instead to reveal them to her father and Mr. Minnick. Quite understandably, she had begged him not to do so. "Emile, I have just had your note. For God's sake, do not bring your once-loved Mimi to an open shame," she wrote. Then another swiftly followed. "No one can know the intense agony of mind I have suffered last night and today. Emile, my father's wrath would kill me. He will hold me as a guilty wretch. On my bended knees I write to you." And then, on the 12th of February, they reconciled, and she had written to Langelier in renewed passionate terms, professing her love to him. "Bring me all my cool letters back," she wrote, "the last 4 I have written, and I will give you others in their place." It was clear she was walking a perilous tightrope, because she had accepted Minnick's proposal of marriage on the 28th of January, while strenuously denying to Langelier that Minnick was anything but a slightly tedious friend of her father's. She knew that if Langelier made good his threats, then she would be ruined, even that her parents might disown her. Yet her denials of the reports Langelier was hearing about town could not go on for much longer. Soon newspaper announcements would confirm the extent of her deception. She also knew that Langelier was unpredictable, volatile, and vindictive. Langelier's first illness came on the 19th of February, less than 2 weeks after she had begged him not to expose her, and only days after she had renewed her affections to him. Langelier's diary, which was not admitted as evidence, reveals that he did indeed meet with Madeleine on the 19th of February, and that he was ill afterwards. He also intimated this to Miss Perry. Madeleine's subsequent letters are solicitous of his illness. She offers to give him bread. She admitted that she sometimes gave him cocoa through the window on his visits. The defence had a difficult task. Madeleine Smith was a woman engaged to a wealthy and eligible man of excellent character, a marriage to whom would be desirable for any young woman in her position. Yet she was unable to extricate herself from a past relationship with a humble warehouse clerk that threatened every prospect and hope she possessed. Furthermore, the erratic lover was threatening exposure of the nature of that relationship to her father and to her fiancé. It was a potentially calamitous situation, from which exhortations to his honour as a gentleman, and to his reason as to the impossibility of their union, had fallen on deaf ears. The prosecution's case was unquestionably strong, but it was lacking in one important respect. In order to prove beyond doubt that Langelier had been poisoned by Smith, it was necessary to show that she had met him on each of the 3 occasions prior to which he had been taken ill, and most particularly on the final occasion. This it was unable to do, at least not directly. Madeleine's letters either requested meetings on these dates, alluded to meetings which had taken place, or else witnesses reported that Langelier had informed them that he was meeting with Smith. But as the letters were undated, they were largely dependent on postmarks on their envelopes to ascertain when they had been written. The prosecution, in the form of Lord Advocate Lord Inglis, went to admirable lengths to construct a narrative from the letters, to date them from internal evidence and references. But the defence insisted that it could only be inferred from these assignations that she had actually met him, and as Madeleine denied that she had done so, it was clear that it was on such inferences that the trial of Madeleine Smith would be determined. It was a significant blow to the prosecution that a diary kept by Langelier was not admitted as evidence, because it made direct reference to meetings, the proof of which was so critical to its case. This was not seen by the jury because 2 out of the 3 judges refused to admit it as evidence. Its contents were telling. Thursday, 19th February. Saw Madeleine a few moments. Was very ill during the night. Friday, 20th February. Passed 2 pleasant hours with Mimi in the drawing room. Saturday, 21st February. Did not feel well. Sunday, 22nd February. Saw Mimi in the drawing room. Promised me French Bible. Taken very ill. These dates correspond with both of the earlier illnesses of Langelier, and if admitted as evidence would have placed her in his company on the occasions he was poisoned. It is widely accepted that had this notebook been accepted in evidence, then Madeleine Smith would have been found guilty of murder. The exclusion of the pocket diary from evidence was thus critical to the outcome of the case. The court case created a sensation not only in Scotland but throughout Britain and beyond. The frankness with which Madeleine Smith had enjoyed relations with Langelier scandalized Victorian society. She wrote in one entry, "I must go to bed, for I feel cold, so good night. Would to God it were to be by your side. I think I would be wishing you to love me, if I were with you. But I do not suppose you would refuse me, for I know you would like to love your Mimi." Here the words love were underlined 3 times, to leave in no doubt what she intended by the use of the word. The Lord Justice Clerk, Lord Hope, called these letters licentious, and the newspapers gave them prominent coverage, and crowds gathered outside the court in the hope of catching a glimpse of the prisoner. Nevertheless, there was a great deal of sympathy for Madeleine Smith, and a dislike of Langelier, who was seen as a grasping and vindictive character. Madeleine's family had the sympathy of the authorities. The Smiths were well regarded. Mr. Smith had many political connections, and the judiciary, without any doubt, went to extraordinary lengths to protect the Smith family to the fullest extent possible. None of the Smith family were called as witnesses by the prosecution. Miss Parry was not cross-examined on the detail of the meeting she had with Mrs. Smith, and Mr. Demien was not cross-examined on the reactions of the Smith family concerning his visit, nor on the discussions he had with Mr. Smith concerning the letters, only on his own motives and actions. Madeleine's family did not attend the trial, so shamed were they by her conduct. Madeleine sat in court, steadfast and unbowed, as she listened to the excoriating evidence of the letters and the case against her. Her resilience was remarkable, and it became an object of fascination to the courtgoers and to the press, who duly reported it to an enthralled nation. No arsenic was found in Madeleine's possession, because she said she had used it all as a cosmetic. The large quantity of arsenic, which was laced with soot, or dyed with indigo in accordance with law, to guard against accidental ingestion, made this improbable in the extreme. No source recommending the topical application of arsenic could be found, and those cited by Madeleine denied they had ever provided any. The Lord Justice Clerk's summing up of the case placed great emphasis on the importance of the fact that the prosecution had to prove that meetings had taken place on the occasions on which Langelier was taken ill, if it was to prove beyond reasonable doubt that Madeleine Smith had poisoned Langelier with arsenic. As such direct evidence did not exist, the matter could only be decided by inference that such meetings took place. That meant on the basis of allusions in letters, requested assignations, and the testimony of third parties. Lord Justice Clark made clear that this was a heavy burden to place upon inference, given the seriousness of the charges. The jury deliberated on the matter for only a short time, while Madeleine remained calm and composed throughout, and at last they delivered their verdict, that the principal charge of murder was unproven. This verdict, uniquely available to Scottish juries, is an alternative to guilty and not guilty. In essence, it amounts to a declaration by the jury that the defendant is thought to be guilty, but that the prosecution has not sufficiently proved it. There was general public satisfaction at the verdict. The public may well have believed her to be guilty, but it was also accepted that there was provocation on the part of Langelier, and her youth accorded her a measure of sympathy. There were only ever 4 possibilities for the poisoning of Émile Langelier. Firstly, that he had accidentally ingested arsenic. Secondly, that he was poisoned by a person unknown. Thirdly, that he deliberately took the poison himself. And fourthly, that Madeleine Smith had administered the poison to him. Accidental ingestion of such large quantities of arsenic on 3 separate occasions is clearly absurd, and so can be ruled out. That he was poisoned by a third person also can be ruled out, because he appeared to have no quarrels with anyone, was on good terms and well liked by his colleagues, and no other shadow of a motive could be discerned. The third option, that of taking the poison himself, was suggested by the defence, and it must be considered. As a means of suicide, arsenic would seem to offer a prolonged and painful means of accomplishing this. It has been suggested that he may have done so as a means of incriminating Madeleine, and having his revenge upon her whilst ending his own life. But it won't do. At no point in the final hours of his life did he mention Madeleine, indicate that he had been in her company, or allude to any suspicion that he had been poisoned by her. Had it been his purpose to incriminate Madeleine, it would have been necessary for him to say these things. He had ample opportunity of doing so. Simply saying he had been with her in the preceding hours might well have been enough. But he didn't. It is a major objection to this theory, since if this was his motive, then he missed an opportunity of securing its purpose. His death may conceivably never have been known, had not the doctor decided that a post-mortem was required. This omission proves fatal to the argument that Langelier could have taken poison to incriminate Madeleine. There remains only one possibility, that Madeleine Smith did indeed meet with him, as indicated by his landlady, Mrs. Jenkins, by his confidant, Miss Perry, and by the letter found in his vest pocket. That having sent him this letter imploring him to meet her, in the course of the evening and early hours of the morning, she plied him with a large quantity of arsenic, probably by means of suspension in cocoa, which apparently is a good medium to disguise arsenic's gritty quality. If this is accepted, it leads to one remaining difficulty, that if Madeleine Smith persuaded Émile Langelier to drink a strange concoction, which had disagreed with him violently on 2 previous occasions, then surely, as he lay seriously ill and dying in the early hours of March the 23rd, he must have known that he had been poisoned, and by whom. The 2 previous occasions might conceivably be attributed to coincidence, but in the third and final one, it defies belief that any human being in such distress would not consider what they had eaten in the preceding hours. In the circumstances, it would be unavoidable that he would conclude he had been poisoned, and that Madeleine Smith was the common factor in all 3 occasions of his illness. This being so, why did he not speak of this to his attentive landlady, who was with him through much of the time until his death, or to the doctor who attended him that morning? There are 2 possible answers to this. The first is that he realized very well that she had poisoned him, but did not wish to incriminate her. The second, and perhaps more likely, is that he was intending to confide his suspicions to Miss Perry. His final act that morning was to send his landlady to ask Miss Perry, his confidant and the person who knew more of the circumstances of the affair than anyone else, to visit him. It is not known why he did this as he lay dying, and it will never be known, because by the time she arrived he was dead. But it may be that he was going to confide his suspicions to her. It is clear that Miss Perry, the French Chancellor, the general public, the jury itself, and her own defence counsel all believed that Madeleine Smith had poisoned Émile Langelier. When Madeleine's attempts to retrieve her letters failed, her feigned resumption of affection for Langelier became an urgent and necessary deception. She had to lure him unsuspectingly to her if she was to administer the arsenic. There is an interesting epilogue to this matter. In a conversation which took place some 50 years after the trial, in 1907, the lawyer and actor H.B. Irving reported privately that he had met Madeleine Smith, and she said to him, "I suppose you want to know whether I did it or not. I did, and what's more, if it were all to happen again, I'd do it again." The inability to prove that the 2 had met on any of the 3 occasions, though its inference from other evidence was strong, gave the court and the jury the means to acquit her. It may not seem to us, as it did not seem to the Victorians, the greatest miscarriage of justice that Madeleine Smith was set free, because there were mitigating circumstances of a compelling social and personal nature. But at a common sense level, taking all into consideration, including the evidence withheld from the jury, it is abundantly clear that Madeleine Smith got away with murder. After the trial, Madeleine Smith returned home to Roallin, a house designed by her father, but which, as a result of the scandal, they abandoned. She was clearly ruined in social terms, yet she appears extraordinarily unabashed by her public shame, or that which she had brought upon her sisters, who were never to marry. Nor was she concerned that the verdict of not proven stigmatized her for life, because it did not exonerate her of the crime, but suggested her guilt. Madeleine herself moved to London and lived in an apartment in Sloane Square with her brother Jack. She called herself Lena Smith, and in 1861 she married and had 2 children, Tom and Kitty. But she never escaped the cloud that hung over her, and she endured the whispers of people wherever she went when people learned who she was. Her marriage ended in 1889, and in the 1900s she moved to New York. There she married again to a William Sheehy and became Lena Wardle Sheehy. In 1926, nearly 70 years after her trial, when the world believed that Madeleine Smith was dead, she was sensationally discovered by the Scotsman newspaper to be alive and living in New York, and her notoriety briefly flared up to illuminate her final years. She died 2 weeks after her 93rd birthday, on the 12th of April, 1928.